Back or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're looking at the reaction of the Nigerian and French authorities to a video that was posted Monday that showed a French family, including 3 children aged 5 to 12, who'd been abducted coming back from a national park in northern Cameroon. They're believed to be in Nigeria. With us to talk about it, Hussaini Abdu of Action Aid Nigeria. He is in the Nigerian capital, Abuja. Also with us, Emmanuel Goujon, consultant with Africa Global Approach. Pierre Connaissant, the author of Manufacturing of an Enemy, How to Kill with a Clean Conscience. Doineg Ledoux of France 24, and Pierre-Antoine Brault of Bois Landry Consulting. We were talking before the break, trying to figure out exactly who is responsible. Hussaini Abdu fielding the proposition that perhaps we could be dealing with a new movement that is not the main branch of Boko Haram. In fact, what is interesting is that 4 members of Boko Haram on Sunday spoke to the press in the northern Nigerian city of Maiduguri and denied they had anything to do with the kidnappings, adding that negotiations with the Nigerian federal government are still on. Hussaini Abdu were confused.
Yeah, actually, there's a confusion there. What we know is
2 years, you don't have one single entity that is called Boko Haram or group called Boko Haram. There may be different groups. Can you hear me? It's echoing.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. So and what is happening is that it's possible that there's a particular group that has been in discussion, and they've actually declared a unilateral ceasefire. And initially, after the declaration, for almost 2 weeks or 3 weeks, Maiduguri and the areas around Yobe experienced a relative peace. And people were beginning to say, "Oh, this ceasefire could be true." And it is the same group that came out very recently to say that they didn't do any kidnapping. So the feeling in Nigeria is to say that these groups may exist. Those ones that declare ceasefire may exist, but the other ones, maybe this other group is also coming in a different platform, of also disagreeing with the ceasefire.
And by the way, it should be pointed out that there have been a string of kidnappings. A Frenchman abducted in Katsina in northern Nigeria back in December, and just 3 days before the Cameroon kidnapping, 4 foreign nationals, including a Briton from a Lebanese construction company compound in Bauchi State. So, what does it say to you that this last the attack in Bauchi State in Jama'are there has been claimed by a splinter group called Ansaru? What does it say to you, the fact that on the one hand, you had a period in 2012, there's a lot of violence, nearly 800 Nigerians were killed for all of last year. Then you've got these negotiations that Hussaini Abdu is describing, and now these splinter groups.
We call them splinter groups, but there might be also branches of Boko Haram. We can imagine a strategy from that terrorist group to split in some different cells and groups inside different parts of Nigeria. Bauchi and Maiduguri are not the same area, and they are quite distant, far from each other. Also, we can imagine that, like it was the case with Al-Qaeda, some groups are claiming actions in the name of Boko Haram, even if they are not real members of the Boko Haram original, genuine sect. In fact, they want to kind of brand the name Boko Haram. And it drew one question to me very strongly: why the French authorities have targeted from the beginning, the day they were kidnapped, Boko Haram sect. You remember that President Goodluck Jonathan was in France on a state visit just before this kidnapping. He met with President Hollande. So maybe they have discussed about it, and maybe they had the name in their mind at the time. But it's very strange that so quickly, so strongly, they targeted Boko Haram as responsible for this kidnapping when we had at the time no evidences.
Pierre Conessa, did that surprise you last Tuesday? The French president was on a visit to Greece. Right away, he said the words Boko Haram.
I am surprised by two things. The first one is a declaration just beginning the intervention, military intervention in Mali, in which, President Hollande declared that we are doing war with terrorism, which means nothing and everything. And this point, which is exactly the opposite, which is targeting precisely the group which is supposed to have kidnapped, French citizens, which we don't know. Probably, I have in mind, the example of Algeria, in which all the Islamist group has split, between GIAs and the Groupe pour la Prédication et le Combat, because there were a political difference between the both. One was the complete struggle against everybody and everything, and kidnapping and the rapes, etc. And the Prédication pour le Groupe pour la Prédication et le Combat was more political line, in which they were trying to get, more consensus. So I'm not surprised by your analysis, because I do think that this group are not really unified. They are just labelized, Boko Haram or GIA or Al-Qaeda.
The former U.S. President Bill Clinton was on a visit this Tuesday to Abeokuta Husseini Abdu, and he said that for all the problems rooted in religious differences and all the rhetoric of the Boko Harams and others, the truth is the poverty rate in the north is 3 times that of what it is in Lagos. Now, tackling poverty is a noble ambition, but what do you do in the short term?
Yeah, I think there are 2 dimensions to it. Of course, poverty is an issue. Over 70% of the people are living in the northeast of the country are living below poverty line. Illiteracy is very high. Unemployment is quite high. But interventions to reduce this will be both long-term and medium-term. But in the meantime, there is something we need to do very quickly to respond to issues of emergency. There have been concrete actions to be seen that we are reducing poverty and we are encouraging people to go to school. Job opportunities are being created. So this is what is required. But military action will not completely solve the problem. In the last 1 year, we've lost over 3,000 people have been killed in the northeast of the country, either by Nigerian military or the Boko Haram system. Women, children have been displaced just because of a military action. Children cannot go to school. They can't attend hospital. People have lost their livelihood because they can't go to market. They can't go to farm just because of this Boko Haram issue. So the military action cannot be the ultimate solution. We must look at the humanitarian crisis that has been created as a result of this action.
All right, so
the government must be seen to do other things that will encourage more people to drop their arms and also ensure that communities are also brought closer to appreciate the situation so that there can be a collective action to this crisis.
All right, so showing that the federal government is involved, showing that it's not just about going in and military action. Husseini Abdu says that could be one thing you can do in the short term.
Yes, if I can jump back just on this mention to poverty, actually, because that's a pretty old debate to either say it's social factors or it's community factors. I've never seen a conflict with a single key factor, actually. You have always the same ingredients in a nutshell, but always a different recipe. But what is common as well is to avoid 2 keywords from my point of view with this debate is dignity of individual, ordinary people, and what about governance? What do we do on this issue? They're very classical words, but most of the time these 2 aspects from an implementing approach are overshadowed, unfortunately.
Let me ask you, Doneglodu, because I know that you know Niger well, you're just back from there. It's a country that's poorer than Nigeria, and the economic indicators are very, very bad. There's lots of illiteracy, people whose only schooling is to go to these madrasas, these Islamic schools. Yet it's not as explosive, it seems, as what it is across the border.
Well, I suppose the authorities have been handling the situation in a very different way to Nigeria and to Mali, and that's not for the few months back, but for years. Niger is obviously very much at risk because it's on the way between what's happening in the Sahara Desert
Smack
and what's
in the middle of
happening
everything.
southern. Yeah, and what people say, what I have heard in the past few days in Niamey is that, and that is an important point I think, is that there's been a lot of movement between Nigeria and the north of Mali in the past month or maybe even years. And one point about this, and I'll be back on Niger later, but this video reminds me of the very first video that was released by the Mujao, that's the group that occupied Gao. And when they first abducted people, that's 2 years back, I think, when they took Spanish and Italians in Western Sahara. And one of the men who was speaking on this video spoke English, spoke Hausa with what I was told was a very much academic Kano Hausa accent, and he spoke Tamashek, the Tuareg language, with a Malian accent. And that's 2 years back. So there's been a lot of movement between those two countries, and that may explain why the Boko Haram thing is not so for sure. And those people have been going north, and those people are coming back south now.
Right.
So there's very much to think that those people are coming back to Nigeria.
So very porous borders and people able to go across from one end you can go all the way to Sudan and to Mauritania.
Of course, it's impossible to control. All those countries have been doing great efforts on controlling the borders, but if you just watch a map, it's just impossible to control the borders. Plus, there are families on both sides of the borders in all those countries.
Which brings us to the French intervention in Mali. France had been hoping to get out quick, but is it now in it for the long haul? France's defense minister, who, by the way, this Tuesday described the fighting in the far eastern north of Mali on the radio.
In Mali, we're at the heart of the conflict now, since the Ifagas Mountains is where we thought the most radical terrorist groups had taken refuge. We weren't sure, now we are certain. So the fighting is fierce. Our aim is, of course, to allow Mali to regain its full integrity, including in this region, which has been the rallying point for these groups for a long time. We're in their land, we have entered their home.
Jean-Yves Le Drian, who goes on to say, Pierre Conessa, that that's been their stronghold, their house, as he just put it in that clip, ever since the end of Algeria's civil war, which was a decade ago.
Well, I don't believe it because what means first the Malian integrity. I mean, I quite agree with you. I mean, the border in Africa are not meaning anything. I mean, it's not the same meaning that the border for us, which means a separate line between two countries. On the opposite, I would say that in Africa, the borders are just dividing peoples living on the two sides of the border. And so we can formally get the integrity of Malian governance. But what means the Malian governance? If there is a crisis in Mali, it's because that bad governance in which, I just would like to come back to the question you were asking about the relationship between poverty and violence. I don't think that in Saudi Arabia or in Qatar, which is the matrix of the Salafists, the question is poverty. No, it's inequality, and it's this Salafist theory which is spreading all over Africa and the rest of some Muslim community all over the world. And so the problem in Africa is that the most corrupted countries are the most violent, not the poorest. This in Nigeria, the main problem is corruption, mainly, because you have so inequality between the highest class, and the lower class of the country, which is quite shocking.
The last time you came on our show, you described how in 2006 you went up to Maiduguri in northern Nigeria and you met with the leaders of Boko Haram at the time. How much does their message still resonate today compared to back then, 7 years ago?
I haven't been to Maiduguri since then, but I think it hasn't changed much. Maybe they have built up some roads or built up 1 or 2 schools, but nothing much. For sure, the claims of Boko Haram at the time already was to install Sharia everywhere in Nigeria, only in Nigeria, not in the whole of Africa. But also they were arguing that the wealth of the country was not shared properly, fairly to all Nigerians. And for them, unemployment was a reality. Lack of money, finance was a reality. And they were complaining that mainly only people, youth from big families, rich families, governors, ministers, and so on and so forth, were having opportunities to get some jobs. So they were suffering from that as well. And that's why some of them, well-educated, some of them, decided to go to the desert in that kind of Islamic tradition, you know, to hide and pray and everything, to find their own way. And the way was terrorism because they had no other opportunities.
So what are you saying? This is a northern sort of version of the armed groups in the Niger Delta who started out as fighting against inequality, but in some cases turned to banditry and kidnappings.
In Nigeria, anyway, everything at the end of the day ends up with money and money issues. So maybe in the north, some of these Boko Haram groups will end up asking for money to release the hostages. During the negotiation, some of the Boko Haram leaders are having with the government of Nigeria already. They have been discussing for some amounts of money, millions and millions of nairas, in order to finance their families, the families of the people who have been killed during different fightings, the release, of course, of their comrades, but mainly about money. In the south, you were quoting Niger Delta. The main, for example, that was one of the main rebel movements in the Niger Delta, was at the same time playing on the international market on oil, like betting money when they were attacking pipelines and so on and so forth. And then they were getting money like that, but they were also abducting people and asking for ransom, you know. And then some of them were Muslims, and some of them had the same revendication that Islam has to be the system and force for the whole society of Nigeria. Because in fact, what they are looking for through Islam, we can think or say, is just more justice, more equality,
Right,
and,
so the issue,
law.
It comes back to rule of law and social equality. We'll continue to follow the money. We'll continue to follow this story. I want to thank you very much, Emmanuel Goujon, Donaigle-Du, Pierre Conessa, Pierre-Antoine Brault. I also want to thank Husseini Abdou for joining us from the Nigerian capital, Abuja. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.